Welcome, everyone. Yeah, good evening here on the East Coast. Happy fall. Happy early All Saints. Uh, Happy Reformation. Maybe.
Don't go there.
I'm not sure.
Todd is back. His Johnson is healed. Praise the Lord. I got a head CT scan back today, and apparently I have a brain abnormality. Not life threatening, but now my kids are telling me that, I have a brain defect, and that's why I don't understand their jokes. So anyway, given my brain limitations, you guys are gonna have to carry the load tonight, I think. So yeah, Josh, what do you have for us? Take it away.
So we were going to talk about how Hauerwas views the Reformation as unconfessed sin. And so I'm going to sing not a breakup song, but somebody who's lamenting over a future that could have been differently. And there's still a little hope in it. So how about that? Let's try this.
Looking out the door, I see the rain fall upon the field of mourners. Parading in a wake of sad relations as the shoes fill up with water. Maybe I'm too young to keep good love from going down, but tonight you're on my mind. You never know, I'm broken down and hungry for your love with the way you make me feel it. Too young to alone, too old to just burn through it. Sometimes a man gets carried away when he feels like he should be having his fun. Much too blind to see the damage he's done. Oh, sometimes a man must learn to find he really has no one. So I'll wait for you and I'll learn. Whatever say sweet return. You should have come over, but it's not too late. Lonely is the room the bed is made, the open window is raining. Burning in the corner, the only one who's begging. My keep good love from going You should have come over, but it's not too late.
What was that, Josh?
Jeff Buckley, album titled Grace. Lover, you should come over.
Jeff Buckley. Oh, why do I know that name?
You better know that name.
What? So
He's deceased now, but very, very wonderful guitar player and singer.
Yeah.
He's the one that made Leonard Cohen's Hallelujah famous.
Oh,
You know what I'm talking about? The
one of the most overdone songs in the world. Yeah.
right, but did it because because he put his spin on it. Everybody was like, "Wow, how'd you do that? How'd you
Yeah.
take so long and make it better?"
Okay. That Hallelujah, that Leonard Cohen song is like the musical equivalent of Henry Allen's Wounded Healer. It's just, I wish it's like a great work that I now wish no one ever put out into the world.
The cracks are where the light gets in.
Oh gosh, that's overused quote ever. Okay. We are here. So yeah, uh we're at the point in the liturgical calendar where this Sunday is All Saints Sunday. And then quickly pivots to Christ the King Sunday and Advent, which traditionally, at least, though not in the American church, looks forward to the appearing of the risen Christ in the eschaton. And so it's an eschatological season, a time of the church dwelling on the last things, and kind of stuck in the midst of that. Some parts of the body of Christ celebrate the Reformation, and so this week marks the 508th anniversary of the Reformation. And so I thought, we have this bridge time between what we were doing on Monday nights and what we will do on Monday nights. And so I thought, let's talk about a sermon on Reformation Sunday. And that could be really boring. So I thought, let's do this old Stanley Hauerwas sermon. But first, kind of set the stage. Stanley's preaching on Luke 18, which Todd is the lectionary passage for this past Sunday, the parable of the Pharisee and the tax collector. So that's the text that Stanley is preaching on. But I think the more relevant text for what Stanley's sermon is about is from John 17. So listen for the word of God.
Mm.
I do not ask for these only, but also for those who will believe in me through their word, that they may all be one, just as you, Father, are in me, and I in you, that they may also be in us, so that the world may believe that you have sent me. The glory that you have given me, I have given to them, that they may be one, even as we are one, I and them, and you and me, that they may become perfectly one, so that the world may know that you sent me and loved them even as you loved me. And so that's John 17, Jesus's high priestly prayer in the garden. So a little context. Stanley, so the sermon is found in this book, Sanctify Them in the Truth. You can find it for free online on various blogs and websites and things. But the book provides the context, which I had forgotten. It's a sermon for the Fig Tree Assembly in New York. I have no idea what that is, and I've tried to find out. I even emailed Stanley, and I didn't hear back in time. It was preached on October 29th, 1995. And it was a sermon that is in honor of Robert Wilkin, a Catholic, which I think is important context. Robert Wilkin is a Catholic. He was a teacher of mine at the University of Virginia. Wrote a great book called Christians as the Romans Saw Them. And so it's, yeah, so that's the context of this sermon. And so I wanted to start just getting you guys' immediate reactions to it overall.
It's an artful word. He confesses in the sermon that this is not your typical Reformation Sunday. He takes a different tack, right? This is not something that he wants to celebrate. It's something he wants to lament until the day that we are one again with all our Christian brothers and sisters.
Yeah. Todd?
I thought it was an exceptionally evocative title. I read it the next day. I guess I read it last Tuesday after watching you all online, and I think I noted that it was quite the sermon. I actually liked it. I probably should give some context. I'm battling a fly here. There was there's a time where our church, myself, we didn't follow or know much really about the Christian calendar or the liturgical calendar. So any idea of celebrating Reformation Sunday was totally foreign until probably the early 2000s, maybe a little bit after that. So well after Stanley would have preached this particular sermon. So we played catch up and made a point to try to work Reformation Sunday into a bunch of Baptists, and so it's kind of startling to read a perspective like this. But actually, I thought back to my time in high school where I sat across the table from a Catholic friend, and we had lots of interesting discussions. And then at my 40th high school reunion, some of the young ladies that were now old ladies, like I'm an old man, noted that they felt as Catholics that we thought they were all going to hell. And I'm like, gosh, did we really give you that sort of impression? Because I don't recall it that way. But nonetheless, never wanted anyone to feel like because of the particular church they attended or whatnot, automatically classified them, for nether regions. So this was fascinating to read. Lots of things came to mind.
Yeah. So just a few broad brushstrokes before we. This is what I like about Stanley's sermons is that they're short enough that we can just work our way through them block by block. But one of the things I learned from Stanley a long time ago is that sermons should be arguments. Even if they're not explicitly an argument, that there should be some polemical edge. And this is obvious in this sermon. And Stanley, bless his heart, like David Bentley Hart, doesn't know how to not be polemical. So, and the downside of that is often exaggeration. The upside of it is clarity in what he's thinking. So I think I want to call attention to the argumentative nature of of how he understands homiletics. And then I was thinking also, it's not just that this is a sermon in honor of Robert Wilkin, a Catholic church historian. Um, it's also because the pivot he makes to the Jews at the end um, it is also reflective of Stanley is someone who, for a long time, uh, was a Methodist theologian at Notre Dame who was friends with Jewish scholars, Mennonite scholars, and Catholic scholars, and so and it was his experience teaching in these communities that actually made him a Christian, right? Like he grew up in the church, but this is what formed him as a Christian, and so his Christianity is very much shaped by relationships with people from different traditions. And so it isn't, so it's, Robert Wilkin teaches at UVA with another of Stanley's friends, Peter Oakes, who's a Jewish rabbi.
Yeah.
And so I think Stanley's someone who always has this constellation of friends in his mind um, when he's thinking. And so, all right. So he he begins the sermon right out of the gate by saying, "I don't understand why this is a part of the church year. Um, um, Reformation is sin." First sentence of the second paragraph: Reformation names the disunity in which we currently stand. I was thinking about you guys are pastors. We all know of relationships that end in divorce um,
Hmm.
in a way that is probably best for one or both parties. Right? There is such a, practically speaking, there's such a thing as a good divorce. Um, but yeah, but it would be weird if people like every year celebrated their divorce, right? And that like essentially that is what Reformation Sunday is. It's and that we don't think of it that way is to our judgment. Like that's kind of Stanley's point in a nutshell. And so he ends that second paragraph saying, if we no longer have broken hearts at the church's division, then we cannot help but unfaithfully celebrate Reformation Sunday. Um, yeah, I mean, yeah, just I mean, get your thoughts to these first two paragraphs.
Yeah, I like the reminder that the Protestant movement began as a protest within the communion called Catholic, and Stanley reminds us that when it becomes an end in itself, then we're just celebrating our divisions and our sin. And yeah, I mean we've done some reading on Bonhoeffer recently, and I'm reminded of him saying, that Protestantism went across the Atlantic to America and didn't have anything to protest against, and that's why it takes the weird shape that it does in America, because we don't have not everybody has those relationships that you said formed Hauerwas, because we've been living on an island unto ourselves, and it's made us strange indeed.
Todd?
That's an interesting. I was thinking. I went back and read it again just a little bit ago, and I thought about the modern sort of champion call "semper reformanda." Always reforming. So it really does, in that particular way that Stanley couches this, really give good explanation or illustration of kind of the ongoing competitive polemical nature of denominational kind of ruptures. And so I think that he hits a good point that it's in the DNA. And it's like in my own denomination, it's always this underlying sort of puritanical move, always moving. You're not right enough, or you're not far enough, or you're not literal enough, or you're not conservative enough. And I think that probably, I mean, the Methodist kind of had a little bit of schism, and like who hasn't? And so I think he's hit upon something, and we see there seems to be no regret from time to time, which
hmm
uh, is disturbing.
Yeah, I was thinking that, so Martin Luther um, sought to, um, so Reformation Sunday marks Martin Luther inviting a debate about items in question in the only church that he knew, right? Like Martin Luther did not set out to start his own branch of the Christian tree. Um, John Calvin did not start out um, to begin something called Calvin. Like they fled France because they were being persecuted. Like Henry VIII, for all of his other problems, was like a sincere like theological student, and was not intending to have uh, a permanent theological break from the Catholic Church. John Wesley did not intend to leave the church, like again and again and again and again, like um, so it's like the people on Azusa Street, like they weren't like, let's create a denomination called Pentecostalism now. It's like the Spirit happened, and a Methodist church that was now a middle class church couldn't accommodate it. And so, we have these traditions that we exist in, um, and they're older than we are, and so we don't see um, like how they were never intended to be uh, their own self-contained, um, independent, isolated tribes. Yeah. Um, and I think Stanley called attention to it. Like that's most pronounced in Lutheranism, right? Because it gets broken up into language groups,
Mhm.
and so like the church that Ken Jones goes to, that I've preached at a couple of times, has a ship in the sanctuary that hangs from the ceiling, because it's a Danish Lutheran church. On the one hand, like that's great, right? And on the other hand, it's like, we shouldn't be siloing our Christianity up according to like nation groups and language groups. Anyway, yeah. So I think, yeah, I think the tone in which Stanley begins this is a helpful corrective for Protestants, right? Because Catholics look at us and see, they see us as separated brethren. Um, and so that language at least names the disunity in a way that we don't know how to name it.
Yeah. The ecclesiola and ecclesiae.
Okay, so then Stanley moves to the text.
Yeah. So just a second.
Yeah.
What were you saying, Todd?
You waiting on me? Yeah. Yeah. My internet kind of, I guess, is a little wonky. So you emphasize Protestant. So what about the what about the Eastern Church? It's also divided up geographically, and there are some nuances, depending on if you are talking about an Antiochian Orthodox Church, or you're talking about the Greek Orthodox Church. So, I mean, I just wondering, just here thinking about that, because I've listened to Frederica Matthews Green talk about Orthodoxy, or Eastern Christianity, and it's not as singular as
No,
make it sound.
I would. So I do think, um, if we're going to think about the whole church, right? East and West. I do think, I think the way orthodoxy has accommodated itself to authoritarianism over the centuries is problematic, right? But I would say that what exempts them from Stanley's critique is that Orthodox Christians do not believe their interpretation of Scripture or their beliefs about this, that, or the other is what unites them. Yeah,
Right.
and so so that it's the Eucharist and that unites them.
That's a good
And so
point.
I would say like their language differences are less determinative, or less problematic in the context of what Stanley's arguing. So Stanley pivots to the text, the parable of the Pharisee and the tax collector, and he wants to, and I think this is important, right? That how you think of the church and its history, your the theological persuasion given to you by your particular branch on the Christian family tree, it then it shapes how you read Scripture. And if you don't have any friends who read it differently than you, you're not in a position for anyone to question your reading of it. And so Stanley says, note what the Reformation has done for our reading texts like that which we hear from Luke this morning. We Protestants automatically assume that the Pharisees are the Catholics. They are the self-righteous people who have made Christianity a form of legalistic religion, thereby destroying the free grace of the gospel. We Protestants are the tax collectors, knowing that we are sinners and our lives depend upon God's free grace, and therefore we are better than the Catholics because we know they are sinners. What an odd irony that the Reformation made such readings possible. As Protestants, we now take pride in the acknowledgement of our sinfulness in order to distinguish ourselves from Catholics who allegedly believe in works righteousness. I mean, that's just true. Like, there's so much of Protestant Christianity where it's like I have to pretend I'm a worse sinner than I am, so that like the gospel applies to me. Like that's just crazy. That's just crazy. And like again, like you guys are Protestant pastors. Like I don't think my experience is isolated to me. Um, I think there is a deep, deep, deep reservoir of unexamined anti-Catholic prejudice in most United Methodist congregations. And it's been given to them. It's been learned. Like they're not necessarily naturally prejudiced, right? That they view Catholics as people who follow a legalistic, hierarchical, patriarchal religion, and a religion I would just challenge people to notice how often people speak of Catholics as though they're like it's a different religion.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah. And this is something else I was going to talk. That one of the comments I hear a lot from Protestants about Catholics, especially former Catholics, who are usually the least charitable assessors of Catholicism. That what I hear often is, well, like the Catholics just don't teach the Bible. And I'm here now, Pastor, because I just never learned the Bible this way. And that's a little like me going to a Jew and like, how many baptisms did you do last year? It's like you're imposing a category that's unique to your tradition,
right?
And you're judging the other tradition for not like following your, and that's also a problem about celebrating the Reformation, right? Because we all exist in a tradition for which the Bible has always been available as a printed book. And most Protestants seem to have no awareness that Catholicism existed for 1,500 years without something called the Bible, right? so the way you learned the scriptures as a Catholic until the printing press was in the prayers of the church, the liturgy, the images you saw on the walls, like the reading you heard, the sermon. And so it like the judgment that Protestants wield today still against Catholics is in ignorance of how Christianity is developed.
Well, not only, but we have a lot of Protestant traditions in the United States that fit into two categories broadly, and that is either restorationists, where they think we'll skip over the whole Catholic and Orthodox tradition and go back to back to the Bible, but back to like the New Testament church, as if they could do that, and they think they're just picking it from there. Or people who pick up from the Protestant Reformation and go forward and say there's no need to retrieve the tradition. We're starting from scratch here. Yeah. So it's just they don't even know the need or the poverty of riches that we have when we pass all that.
Yeah, and we have an Ethiopian Orthodox congregation that worships at our church on Saturdays. And when they first started coming, and a few times since, because the incense is definitely triggers the fire alarm. Some people were like, "Well, this is really weird." And I'm like, "Well, like if you want to know what like worship looked like for the people like who knew Jesus, this is kind of what it looks like. They've had no reformation at all. This is like the oldest liturgy that exists in the world. But anyway, okay, so yeah, so I think it is important. I think Stanley's calling attention to the way that the way we think about what Christianity is, and the church then determines how we interpret certain texts. And yeah, Lori, we should get to the Eucharistic distinctions too. But then Stanley moves into his argumentative mode, which I think is good. And this, so I talked about how this is a sermon in honor of Robert Wilkin, a Catholic. Stanley has friends, Jewish friends he always has in mind. And now I think this is the Methodist. This is Stanley before he left the Methodist Church for the Episcopal Church. This is where Stanley the Methodist comes out. Unfortunately, the Catholics are right. Christian salvation consists in works. To be saved is to be made holy. To be saved requires our being made part of a people separated from the world so that we can be united in spite of, or perhaps better, because of the world's fragmentations and divisions. What do you make of that, Todd?
I really always appreciate the way he uses words. So he's going to impute consists in works in an entirely different register than with the normal reader. But he's forcing the normal reader to actually consider what's happening in justification, or so that there is something at work. So I thought that was, I mean, I can see why you like him, and I can see why your preaching is very similar, because there is a way to startle the hearer, into thinking, "Oh, I've never thought about it that way." I mean, wait a minute, maybe it's going to alter my entire perception of how I've categorized people, or in this case, how I've set aside this group for a particular reason. Now I have to go admit that, wait a minute, that's exactly correct. How did I miss that? That kind of thing. So, I like it.
Yeah.
I mean, if yeah.
Yeah, he gets closer to it later in the sermon, but
Oh, wait, before we leave this paragraph, can I say something?
yeah. So yeah.
So pick up where you left off. Unity, after all, is what God has given us through Christ's death and resurrection. For in that death and resurrection, we have been made part of God's salvation for the world, so that the world may know it has been freed from the powers that would compel us to kill one another in the name of false loyalties. As we are having this discussion about divided loyalties even within the church, you guys know I'm in a new appointment. I'm getting text messages about what we're doing for Veterans Day and worship.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, and I mean, Stanley makes that explicit at the end of the sermon that once once you lose the unity of the church, you lose Lori Z's Christianity as what determines as the chief determinant of her identity, right? And she no longer sees then Todd primarily as a brother in Christ, but well, is he a Democrat or a Republican, an American or or whatever? And so Stanley's point is once the once Christ at the table no longer unites all of us, all the other symbols and flags and banners and lures pull us away, pull us apart, and against one another.
And Stanley tries to give a witness to this. You say as he's making arguments, he's saying it doesn't mean he doesn't have any arguments, critique with the Catholic Church, but he offers a witness. He says, how is it that they can have Dominicans and Jesuits and Carmelites and everything all a part of the same communion, even though they don't all dress the same things or even agree on all the same things? It's not the source of their unity. The source is Christ on the table.
I mean, there's literally a denomination called the Free Methodists that only exist because some Methodists were charging people for where they sat in church.
Yeah.
Like that's the history behind and it seems absolutely ridiculous now that that would be the cause to separate from your church. But it's so yeah, it's just once you create your own denomination because of the gays, well, of course you're going to roll back female ordination too. You can't, yeah, it's, yeah. Once you push that, bale of hay over, it keeps rolling. So, anyway, but what I was going to say, Todd, is what Luther was protesting was a manipulation of the penal, of the system of penance, that laid upon Josh works of mercy and penance that he had to perform, so that he could be assured of his eternal salvation.
So that
anyone
building program at St. Peter's.
I challenge anyone to read literally any sermon by Martin Luther and tell me that he didn't think there were things that you should do. So Mr. Grace not works was preaching the law all the time. Justification by faith alone, as Stanley gets to here, is not the message that you are free from works. It is the message that the work that sets you right with God is a work that God is doing.
Right.
So it's not that Todd doesn't have anything to do and he can just luxuriate in his sinfulness like the tax collector in the parable. It's that God is the active agent of salvation, and God is going to get a hold of Todd and make him holy. And that may be painful for Todd. But
his last sentence in that block you're referring to is all that is about the works necessary to save us. So it's passive, to save us. We're not saving ourselves. I thought he did a really good job.
So let's move to okay, so he talks about the Pope, and how it's amazing that the office of the Bishop of Rome is able to, because they have a unity there, that there is a teacher among teachers, which is the Pope's actual title. Because they have a teacher among teachers, they can keep, these monastic orders who are at odds with each other in the same house. They can keep Irish and Italians in the same church. um, um, so then in the next move in the sermon, he contrasts that with Protestants. That once you have an understanding of Christianity that isn't centered in the unity of loaf and cup, bread and wine, you then think that Christianity is primarily about beliefs, right? And that's the critique, right? Well, they don't teach the Bible. What they really mean is like they don't give me the right, they're not talking about belief as much, dogma. And so, and that's like different than how Christians understood what makes them Christian for a millennia and a half. And so, but that doesn't occur to us because like we've lost the connection. But Stanley says that's the reason why Protestants are always tempted to rationalism. And instead of rationalism, I think at this point, you could put the word like secularism. That's the reason why Protestants are always tempted to rationalism. We think that Christianity is to be identified with sets of beliefs more than with the unity of the Spirit occasioned through the sacrament. Once Christianity becomes reduced to a matter of belief, as it clearly has for Protestants, we cannot resist questions of whether those beliefs are as true or useful as other beliefs we also entertained. That's where we live now. This is Stanley the prophet, like the Stanley the soothsayer. Like this is like Christianity is like hard in a secular West because we reduce Christianity to sets of beliefs, and now we exist in a world where everyone has a tiny little computer in their pockets and they can test it against other beliefs that may or may not work better for them.
Yeah.
So here's what's interesting. So clearly, most, I don't know, most probably not a good way. Many low church, free church traditions, small t, don't have such an emphasis on the Eucharist because of clearly anti-Catholic bias. So we refer that to that, of course, as the Lord's Supper. And consequentially, though, the thing that came out of the Reformation that particular group tapped into was the primacy of the pulpit. And so the pulpit replaced the Eucharist as the center of the function of the church to, quote, proclaim the gospel. As a result, the Lord's Supper, the Eucharist, was not a weekly, barely a quarterly practice. So there's a little bit of maybe unacknowledged disunity in that particular move. That is like, well, we're championing proclamation because it was so weak and there wasn't much, and the quote discipleship or understanding of the gospel was so weak and anemic. We had to get back to verse by verse preaching through every book of the Bible, which is now the modern clarion call. But not a whole lot of emphasis, even still in those particular quarters, on the Lord's Supper or the Eucharist. It's not as so. I think there's been that shift, and of course, then I come out to Annandale or Aldersgate or any number of Methodist sanctuaries, auditoriums, and the pulpit's not in the center. What's your problem? The pulpit ought to be in the center of that architecture, but no, it's the table. And lecterns are off to the side. Presbyterian church, church that we go to in Mockingbird, that's kind of how that is. So I think that there's a lot of influence that Stanley's, as you're talking about, working in his head. I think he's got a lot of targets, and I think one of the explainers for kind of some of the things that, like McNally asked, how is it that anybody could feel this way? Well, if you settle that the primary thing has not been the primary thing, then you're going to go to seed on that, and everyone else is wrong.
Well, and so I've got two thoughts. So immediately to Amelie's comment, like how can Protestants think of Catholics as not Christians? Just imagine there was a time in America with like a high anti-immigrant nativist sentiment, like where like maybe we wanted to create like a lawless secret police force with masks that would round up people that looked the wrong way and send them to a gulag somewhere, so they've never lived. Just imagine that time existed in America. And so a lot of um, anti-Catholic prejudice that exists still in our churches is the product, the child, the grandchild, the great grandchild um, of nativist political sentiment.
Mhm.
Right? It was anti-Irish. It was anti-Catholic. It was anti-Italian. It was anti-Greek. Anti-Eastern European. And so like like there's a huge dynamic of it that's just political. And so imagine there was a time in America where like people expressed their politics through Christianity, but it wasn't really about the Christianity, it was just about the politics. Like, like
Imagine.
it's hard to um like so like probably the most significant thing, Josh, that the Methodist movement has accomplished in America is prohibition. Like the women's temperance movement was by and large a woman's movement. And thanks to Ken Burns, I now know it was locked in with with anti-immigrant, anti-Italian, anti-Irish like sentiment. And that's why like Troy's mentioned this the same thing as Melee, like Troy's from the Midwest. Like that was ground zero for all of this,
Right.
So it's
Right.
and again, that's part of I think Stanley's argument is that if we no longer think the unity of the church is Jesus's will, and our disunity is a sin, we don't feel an obligation to know this history, right? In such a like why is it that I think Catholics aren't Christian? Well, it's because you know, 2 generations ago, like these Methodist women like really hated Italians. Because they were setting up bars in Kansas City and St. Louis and all, like across Oklahoma, and like their men weren't coming home for like it all makes sense. But so yeah, I think there's a part of um that we should be one church kind of forces us in a position of like needing to learn why we're not.
Yeah.
Right. If I just think the United Methodist Church is was what God ordained, then I have no need to understand why it is that Todd exists in a different tradition than mine. Okay. Sorry for that. Well,
I think there's a good paragraph just below.
Yeah.
Where he's talking about once religious beliefs start to
yeah.
with other beliefs, then the religious believers are and will know themselves to be mongers of values. They too are denizens of the mall, selling and shopping and buying along with the rest of us. We've mentioned all kinds of cultural things that have changed from our architecture to the shape of our worship. But something else that happened when Protestantism came to the American West is that, Stanley will say himself, not in this sermon, but, he grew up in a Methodist denomination, but you went to church on Sunday, but you got saved on Sunday night, where you had to repeat the camp meeting, tent revival kind of, sing 13 verses of Just As I Am until you walk the sawdust trail. And, there's a very American, like, we're we want to make operational, We want to produce. We want to come out on the other side with we've made goals, and now we have produced this many converts, and we want the numbers. And that's something that we got honest from our beginnings here, and it has carried down, and it's not because it's deeply scriptural or part of the tradition of the church. It's part of the fabric of America. And another thing that Stanley always says is, we don't chart the history of the church in America, but we chart the history of the American church.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was Todd, the thing that you mentioned, I forgot to mention, like the architecture of most Methodist churches, like the tables in the center. Often the organ pipes are behind it, and there's a pulpit, and then there's usually a lectern that isn't quite the same, right? But part of, and I think so the architecture of our churches, Josh, by and large, I think shows that I would not say, and I don't think Stanley would not say, that like the Reformation was like the Reformation as a movement was not a bad thing, right? And so the reason why Methodist churches and Episcopal churches have the architecture they do usually is that the table is what unites us. That is where Christ is the host. So it's at the center of our altar. Jesus happens to us in preaching too. Like, Christ, the sermon and the sacrament are the same. And so like that still has a privileged place, but it's important that like, the gospel can be read by not me, like by not the preacher, right? That there is a danger in just having a giant, like at Princeton Chapel, like a giant pulpit in the center of the room.
Yeah.
That you don't want to give the message that only the preacher can read or speak the gospel.
Now, I want to back up and be fair to the church I grew up in, who didn't have the architecture you described, but there's this massive altar table or supper table carved in the top in remembrance of me. Now it's on the floor, big pulpit, big pulpit, on the steps above it, behind it, but it was center. It just wasn't used very often.
Yeah.
And so if you notice, modern architectural, unless you're maybe particularly acute to your denomination, that's what you can expect now. A glass pulpit or a music stand, and really nothing else but the speaker. I guess that's where I was trying to point out how low church, free church, just completely band-aids. Oh, by the way, we probably should think about this from time to time, like once a year.
And
So that's my point. That's my point there with that. I mean, clearly, I think we've lost some of the architectural value of the reason sanctuaries were adorned the way they were.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, there's a reason for everything, right? Why are like so many Anglican church doors red? To remind you of the blood of the saints.
Right. Right.
There's a why does the baptismal font in the Catholic Church? Why is it the beginning, like as you enter the sanctuary? Because like that's the shape of the Christian life.
Right.
Like this, it's not random. But I was it isn't just that the danger in Protestantism is that we break up into language groups or belief groups. It's that the priest becomes the preacher. The preacher becomes a communicator. The communicator becomes a celebrity. There's like large parts of evangelical Christianity in America, like that's the case. And and yeah, and so then you have prosperity gospel and like paganized versions of Christianity.
Certainly
Uh,
politicized.
Aids.
I got
yeah,
you off track.
no. So kind of the last move Stanley does here in the sermon. He says you can tell the destructive character of that narrative, the narrative the Protestants tell, by what it has done to the Jews. The way we Protestants read history, and in particular our Bible, has been nothing but disastrous for the Jews. For we turned the Jews into Catholics by suggesting that the Jews had sunk into legalistic and sacramental religion, by suggesting that the Jews had sunk into legalistic and sacramental religion after the prophets, and had therefore become moribund and dead. In order to make Jesus explicable, in order to make Jesus look like Luther, at least the Luther of our democratic projections, we had to make Judaism look like our characterization of Catholicism. Yet Jesus did not free us from Israel. Rather, he engrafted us into the promise of Israel, so that we might be a people called to the same holiness of the law. I realize that the suggestion that salvation is to be part of a holy people constituted by the law seems to deny the Reformation principle of justification by faith through grace. I do not believe that to be the case, particularly as Calvin understood that Reformation theme. After all, Calvin and Luther assumed that justification by faith through grace is a claim about God's presence in Jesus of Nazareth. So justification by faith through grace is not some general truth about our need for acceptance, but rather justification by faith through grace is a claim about the salvation wrought by God through Jesus to make us a holy people capable of remembering that God's salvation comes through the Jews.
Mic drop.
I mean, I think
I don't care if I believe that in my very bones. I need to hear that often.
yeah, and as I reread this again, I was like, this is a much better sermon than I remember it being.
Mm.
I just chose it because I knew he had a sermon titled "Reformation is Sin." But I mean, I think and they rub against each other, right? That Stanley, in one way, is very much like Luther, in that Luther was bold enough to withstand people pushing back, saying like, "Really, like, you're the one like who gets this right? Like, all these other it's really you? Like, you really think like you understand this?" And he held his ground, and insisted that the Lord had given him like something to hold on to. Here I stand. I can do no other. So like there was a stubbornness to that that was incredibly bold and brave. And I mean, he risked his life again and again to do that.
It's like being poured out like a drink offering.
And similarly, like Stanley is a warm, wonderful man, who can also be intolerable, because in a similar way, like he, on a few things, he will not compromise, even if all the array of brothers and sisters in Christ are disagreeing with. Like he holds the line, and I think that's been his contribution to the communion of saints. But I think with Luther's certainty about the nature of the gospel led him to frustration when the Jews did not convert. Luther was convinced that if we only look at the Bible, we can, into the vernacular, if we can only proclaim the gospel clearly, then then the Jews will and it was his certainty that led to something diabolical. And I think Stanley, by contrast, his uncompromising nature is balanced or kept in check by the fact that he has friends from all over the body of Christ. And so I think if there's one takeaway from Stanley's sermon is, for people present here or listening later or watching later, it's you cannot read the Bible alone. Despite what the Reformation produced, like you shouldn't be reading the Bible alone. And that means you should be reading it in the company of the saints, with your dead neighbors that Jesus commanded you to love, and like your living neighbors. And so I think one takeaway from this is if you're a Christian, if you're a Protestant Christian, check how you understand your Christianity against some Catholics and Jews. And I should say too that like a lot of the critique that Stanley levels against Protestantism could also be leveled against Catholicism.
Right. Right, but I mean,
as a parent who paid tuition to the Diocese of Arlington for middle school and high school, I can vouchsafe that the Catholic Church has evolved to a point where like they don't really know what these issues were either, and they just wonder like, why are you not Catholic?
Yeah.
But and that's like the other thing too is like most. I don't think like most Protestants and most Catholics don't understand that like most of the things that like Martin Luther posted on the Wittenberg door, like they've been reconciled. Like they're not really issues anymore. So, like his movement worked. Like there was a
there was a corrective.
Yeah.
And
all parties involved changed.
I think something like this, a conversation like this, helps in one way is that we want to acknowledge that critiques of Protestantism, whatever part of that Christian tree that we are individually part of, we need to accept criticism of ourselves, our own self-critique. So, yes, Stanley could launch the critique toward the Catholic Church, but it seems a bit. It would seem a bit like supporting those past trajectories where, let's see if we can't point out all the things wrong with them, rather than what are the things that have us where we are. And I think that's one of the things that was valuable about the sermon, and you pointed it out, that the issue of unity becomes sort of a something that you can't just find a gloss for. You can't just find a way to rationalize that away. That is an issue, and it should be a haunting one. And as far as where we are concerned, it needs to haunt us at the places at which we have maintained that disunity. And so I think that's something that's often missed is, why is Jason banging on the Methodists, and why is Todd, critiquing the Baptists? Well, that's where we are, and it's a little disingenuous to critique someone else when you've not taken a good look at yourself. So I think that's I think there's value in us hearing what role we play in disunity.
Yeah, and Lori had a comment about the Eucharist, and I know often, people who leave the Catholic Church and come to like a Methodist church. I mean, I think when I started, I saw some survey that it was like 40% of United Methodists like grew up Catholic and got married, and this is what they settled on, and they'll point to like being excluded from the table, and so Luther's problem with transubstantiation was not with transubstantiation, it was it belief, right? It was like Luther was against, like, if Christ gives himself to you in the gospel word, then you don't really need to like figure out how it works with baptism or or the or the Eucharist. It's like you can just accept it. You don't need to work out the mechanics of it. But today, because the table is the sign of our unity, um, non-Catholics are not welcome to the table, because to welcome to the table when we're not in fact united is to make a mockery of it. Theologically, that's why we're not welcome. Maybe perhaps that doesn't always get expressed in the most hospitable terms, but that's what's going on. And I think if you can lay it out that way, I think most Protestants can understand that. But yeah, I think another takeaway, Todd, when we're leveling criticism against ourselves, it's like, what is it about our own traditions that we need to be mindful of, that is necessary to do the work of moving towards unity, right? So it's from a Catholic perspective, it would be like, well, you all need bishops because they're in the Bible. It's just like, but yeah, like it needs to be conversations like that. Like, what are the things that we all need to start accommodating to move towards realizing Jesus's prayer?
Agreed.
All right. Well, Todd, last word.
I'm looking forward to next Monday Night Live. I mean, come on, who
Okay.
doesn't? I mean, this is what everybody is. Everybody waits on them. Monday Night Football, who cares? You can watch football now every night of the week. You can't do Monday Night Live. You can't get us three.
Man, you're gonna get killed probably. So we're gonna do this book next. Rowan Williams, Open to Judgment. When I was so mad when I got this, because I thought it was a new collection of sermons by Rowan Williams, and I realized it's just a repurposed version of the book that I already had.
Yeah, 95.
But anyway, so the first section is the Word made flesh. There are 8 sermons, so we're just gonna do those one at a time to take us through Advent. And so the first sermon is entitled Advent. It is a book worth getting, so I encourage people to read it. But I will illegally scan the first one and make it available when I post this video. So, all right.
Sounds good.
Go in peace.
Thank you.